Welcome to Smith Weekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of Smith Weekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion, and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of Smith Weekly, including Edward S., Brian B., Jeff S., and Todd A. On the program today, we've got a returning guest back to update. Mr. Jason Bontempo is on the podcast. Jason is the Chief Executive Officer of Gladiator Metals, a Yukon Canada-focused copper and gold explorer and project developer advancing the Whitehorse Copper Gold Project, which has multiple exploration areas, including the company's cornerstone Cowley Park project, with recent discoveries off of a historic mineral resource and past copper production areas. Within the project area, other prospects include Chiefs, Cub, Arctic Chief, and Jackson Trends. The company is currently underway with exploration drilling to expand existing resources and test for new discoveries. Gladiator Metals is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol GLAD, as well as on the US OTC markets under the symbol GDTRF. Jason, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for coming back to update.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back on the program, Jason, to update. Well, why don't we kick it off here before we jump into Gladiator and what you guys are up to? Lots of good progress so far to kick off the year. But before that, how about we start off with your thoughts on the market and we'll go from there.
Well, volatile would be the best word. It's really been an interesting period. And for those that are quite savvy and maybe close to certain, some of their favorite stocks, it's been an actual opportunity to invest off the back of that volatility at maybe cheaper prices. But ultimately, I've just taken the view, Andrew, that for particularly how the market affects Gladiator is that I think that I don't necessarily look at what's happening right now. I certainly believe that we always look to where we're going. I think what the work that we're doing at Gladiator will ultimately shine as we work through this uncertainty, which hopefully is as soon as possible. And once it does settle down, or there is some certainty around the political situation in the Middle East, that we'll find that the more discerning investors are finding re-rising the quality projects in our sector.
Absolutely agree with that. As you well know, Jason, company-specific deliveries and objectives, goals, discoveries, good drill results, those types of things are really what drive, irrespective of market conditions. Sure, a great bull market, of course, we know that provides extra lift in some of these valuations and equity prices, but nonetheless, you guys are focused full on up in the Yukon, probably a pretty good place to be hanging out in the world today, actually, for a number of reasons, not just exploration drilling, but probably for living and enjoying peaceful nature for the most part. So good information there. Appreciate your views on the market. Always good to get guest views as we go through some of these geopolitical events, clown shows, whatever you want to call it. But why don't we get into updates here on Gladiator? The company is mobilizing and just kicking off a 35,000 meter drilling program under the recently granted permit that you guys were just awarded as well, the Class 3, to accomplish several objectives, including delineation drilling, extension drilling at Cowley, and also hitting target areas at Cub and Great Southern. Just talk a little bit about that program as you guys are kicking this off, the schedule, and also, of course, objectives and when we can start to see results come in.
Look, I think I'll start off with an analogy on the Whitehorse Copper Project. We have been working the Whitehorse Copper Project now and advancing it for the last 3 years. And the analogy I'll use is that we'll talk about a departure of an aeroplane in the sense of taking off. We have had quite a long taxi, and then we've had quite a long runway. But we very much believe at Gladiator Metals that the next 3 months of this year, the beginning of this year's campaign, is where we really believe that we will be taking off in a big way. And a lot of that has to do with the recent milestone achieved in permitting, which was the award of the Class 3 permit. And this is significant for us for three reasons. Number one is that long taxi and runway was because we were operating under a more restrictive permit at the time, called a Class 1. And the three reasons why this milestone of Class 3 is so important is, number one, we can drill a lot more pads per claim. We can drill from a lot more areas within a mineral claim, whereas before we were restricted to a maximum of 8 areas. Number two is we're able to create roads and trails to be able to access a lot of our prospective targets that we couldn't access before. And that's both within advanced areas like Cowley, but also at new targets from our exploration work. And then number three is the big tick of approval that we got from the Whitehorse community in the sense of a social acceptance, because the Class 3 involves a significant amount of public consultation, which we passed with flying colours, not only with the broader Whitehorse community, but also with our First Nations. So we're really proud of that. So it most definitely is a key milestone. And what that allows us now is to be able to more rapidly access areas, more rapidly drill. If we make a discovery, we can move quickly to defining resources. And I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. That's the first key milestone for the year. Our season hasn't started yet. It's starting late this season. We normally start around early February, late January, February, but we were waiting for this Class 3. And so that's why we're now in April and we're about to kick off shortly. So we put some news out yesterday. What that news essentially highlights is we do have an initial plan, 35,000 meters. That is fully funded. We have a treasury of 20 million. So we can most certainly get going with confidence. And we're focused primarily in the south of the belt. If for your listeners, if you look at our holding, it's approximately 35 kilometre long copper belt. And for the most part, we are actually focused for this particular campaign in the south, and for very good reason. And there's three good reasons. Number one, it's where our most advanced prospect is, which is Cowley. There's over 300 holes into Cowley. We have a high degree of confidence of delivering an economic, significant, substantial copper resource there, which will be at surface and high grade copper. And that, Cowley in effect underpins where we are now. The plan is to send a rig, a drill rig immediately to Cowley, starting from mid-April. And the focus there will be to access areas we couldn't access before, but also to increase the density of drilling to bring us a resource definition and delineation, but also to fill in a number of large gaps in areas that we believe are going to be mineralized, and not just mineralized, but high grade mineralization. So there's gaps, but then there's also troughs where we weren't able to, again, access areas under our previous permit. And we believe that we will be bringing significant high-grade mineralization to surface. Cowley is going to be the first area that will be drilled. We're expecting results from that area to flow from the end of May, when we start drilling mid-April. What that'll be doing is just further delineating what we believe is a significant resource there. And I repeat, it's the cornerstone of the project. It's where we think that underpins our current valuation, which is in and around that 130 million Canadian market cap. And so for us, the next 3 months, we believe, are going to be quite transformational. And this is where I'm going to go back to the taking off of an aeroplane analogy. I think we're getting towards the end of the runway, and this is where we believe the company really has the opportunity to take off now. And that's because not only are we going to really finally prove up and bring confidence to Cowley, but we are also going to be testing 2 other areas which are very close by to Cowley. The second area will be what we call Cub East. It was newly discovered at the end of last year. It sits about 2 kilometers southwest of Cowley, and we're very excited about the Cub East discovery. So we'll be sending a drill rig there at the same time as at Cowley. And The reason why we're excited is because it was the first time that our geophysics exploration model worked, where we were combining both gravity and IP. And what do I mean by that? Well, the gravity measures the density of mineralization compared to the country rock. And what we were finding is everywhere that we had what we would see as a gravity target, where the density of a particular area is much higher than its surrounds. 11 times we drilled a gravity high, and 11 times we intersected copper skarn mineralization. There would be varying degrees of grade. And so that is why when we said, well, how do we pick and prioritize these gravity targets? Because clearly it's working as an exploration tool, but now we want to focus on where we think the higher grade copper is. And that's when we introduced what we call induced polarization, or IP. Now that IP measures the chargeability. So it's effectively putting a current into the ground. And because the copper is hosted in the sulfides, it holds that current. And the longer it holds that current, the more of a reading, or the higher a reading, the more potential we believe that that there'll be a higher grade of copper mineralization. So you have both the density and the chargeability. And Cub East was the first target that we drilled both gravity, I should say both density and high density and high chargeability. And in our first 5 holes, we intersected high grade copper and gold mineralization straight away. And so that was a huge, big high-fiving moment for the technical team. And so the reason why we're sending a rig to Cub East immediately is because we believe that there's still a significant amount of this gravity and density and chargeability target. There's at least another 800 meters of strike to test. There's a very much a high confidence that we believe we should be able to drill out another significant tonnage of copper mineralization. So, at Cowley, we are now looking in that 30 to 40 million ton range. At Cub East, it's looking like it could be within that first pass, in that 20 million ton range. Remember, these are all at surface. It's not underground. This is from surface. And we're looking at that 1 to 1.5% copper equivalent grade, which, as you know, is quite high. And then, of course, we are planning to move a third rig to a very, very significant, what I would have to use the word is enormous gravity and IP response. So again, we have a very high density and very high chargeability, and it's over a very large area, and it sits only 2 kilometers south of the Cowley area. We call it the Great Southern. A lot of anticipation around this particular target because of its size and because of its geophysical readings and response, I should say. And that is where the third rig will go. And there's a very strong confidence from the technical team that it will be copper skarn mineralization based on the data that they have to date. And really, it'll be a function of its tenor. What will be the grade? And for these 3 target areas, all within effectively like a triangle, with each point being about 2 kilometers from each other, is why we believe the company could soon take off very quickly, because from the outset, we initially targeted 100 million tons of copper skarn mineralization at above 1% from surface for the whole belt. And what we're seeing now is potentially getting to that target in a very, very small area of the belt. But add to that, Andrew, that if this geophysical exploration tool of gravity and IP, the density and the chargeability, works for a second time, well, then that's when we believe there'll be a significant increased amount of speculation as to what could the whole belt host in terms of mineral resource. Because if it's working, need I say that there could be a number of significant undiscovered deposits along the belt using this geophysical model. So results we expect to come in from the end of May through June. And this is why I think that drilling at these 3 areas are all value add. Drilling at these areas is the reason why I believe the company could be quite transformational in a big way over the next 2 to 3 months. And it's taken 3 years to get here, tiptoeing through the system and also obtaining those layers of data, and knowledge and IP that we have now on the project, which didn't exist. It was laying dormant for 40 years, if you might recall from previous conversations. And so we're very excited that this campaign is about to kick off. We're fully funded, and I think there'll be a lot of eyeballs looking at what happens in this small area, because there has been a lot of eyeballs on the Yukon in general. The real recent success of the Pierre Lassonde group entering into the coffee mine with Fuerte has been very successful. The Lundin family into fireweed. Snowline obviously is a big, outstanding discovery. And then also now more recently, you've had Agnico Eagle enter the Yukon with a joint venture and equity participation with Cascadia. So I've got absolutely no doubt that the next 3 months for Gladiator, if we deliver what we think we're seeing and what the data is telling us, we're going to have a lot more interest in the company.
I appreciate you walking us through all that and what's going on. So lots of moving parts here, lots of things that are happening. Well, first, congratulations on the Class 3 permit. I'm specifically interested in seeing you guys fill in some of those gaps at Cowley Park, first and foremost, and then, of course, some of these other targets and seeing what the success is there. The company put out results in January with obviously some great intercepts, good grades. And so this is looking really good. And then I think the other thing too is you mentioned the close proximity of these. Generally, it's surfaced conventional thinking here as far as potential for if it was to be extracted, conventional mining. Location here is really good, and maybe we could talk a little bit about infrastructure so you can orientate the audience a little bit more as to how close this is to infrastructure. All your access is right there, and then of course you guys are hitting mineralization that can all be brought into a single operation. So very good information on that. I suppose beyond just this program you guys have set up, which you mentioned is fully funded, we'll talk cash and budget here in a little bit on capital structure, but any other objectives that you want to hit on this year, 2026, and any other plans to finish out the season?
Depending on the results in the next 3 months, Andrew, it could very well be that the 35,000 meters plan turns into a lot more, and that we would be busy all year drilling just in this southern area. So from a drilling perspective, it could very well be that that's where we remain for the whole season, right until early December. However, we are contemporaneously working on other exploration components to the project, in particular the geophysics exploration work, where we are now completing a lot more IP surveys over a lot of the gravity surveys that we'd completed last year. So if you can imagine, we've actually done a lot of gravity geophysics surveys over a good 20 kilometers of the belt, particularly up at the Chiefs Trend, up at the Arctic Chief Trend. But what we now need to do is now run the IP to measure the chargeability. And so that's happening in the background throughout the year. And so that will be potentially highlighting another number of prospective targets like Cub East was and like Great Southern currently is. So that's occurring. And then in the background, we also have built up and added to the team with structural geologists and geophysicists, where what I have been talking about with you over our interviews is primarily a high-grade copper skarn project, which effectively lies at surface. And that on its own is now looking like potentially could be world-class as is. But what lies beneath, and some of the work that we completed last year, is we're starting to now identify porphyritic signatures in our core, where we're intersecting bornite, chalcopyrite, we're intersecting copper minerals in the granite. What I mean by that is typically where we're finding the copper skarn at surface, that's based on a contact of granite and limestone. Whereas now we're drilling a bit deeper and we're finding the copper in only the granite from a deeper source. So that when you start getting to a deeper source, that's when you can start really thinking about the porphyry potential, where we believe that there could be a number of porphyry feeders for this copper skarn. So that's another component of the project that would be extremely significant or transformational in value if we start to cotton on and vector to a porphyry within the project.
Talk a little bit about, just for the audience to understand here, just give us a bit of a flavor on infrastructure, the location of this project, very prospective grounds. And we haven't even talked about the stuff you guys have in the portfolio to the north, but just talk a little bit about infrastructure and orientate the audience for those that are looking more towards the economics and those types of early stage thinking on development.
Well, look, I mean, we run along the western margin of Whitehorse City. Whitehorse City is approximately a population of 30,000. It has a very strong mining focused labour resource, and particularly for a number of the projects that lie in the north of the Yukon. So that's going to be a huge advantage where we don't have to worry about a camp or fly in, fly out style employment. We obviously have the access to the excellent road infrastructure. The Alaska Highway runs along the eastern margin of the project, which is very handy. So we have excellent access to it for exploration, but should there be a development in the future, that's going to be again a huge advantage. And then there'll be the ability to connect to the grid or the grid within the Yukon for power. I mean, there's water. From an infrastructure perspective, extremely well placed, and any further away from where it's currently located would be a disadvantage. From an exploration perspective, it allows a much lower cost per meter. We don't have to set up exploration camps. We're not as restricted in terms of our access and our storage costs. And of course, our partner is original vendor, but now our partner in the project is a global drilling business based in Whitehorse as well. So there's a lot going for it. We average about all in with assays and etc. Around that sort of $200 to $250 Canadian per meter, which is a very good rate. It allows us to get a lot of value for the money raised. And then later, from a development or mining perspective, well, you can imagine there's a significant saving. There'll be significant savings in capital costs where the access to the project is unparalleled with existing infrastructure.
It's an excellent location, a fantastic pickup. And you mentioned some of the years you guys put this package together, and just looking back here at the value add over the years, you guys have just done a nice job to not only preserve equity value, but then grow the equity value as well through some of these steps, which, of course, take time, and, folks get distracted, markets go up and down, what have you. So been a very good, for a shareholder, I think it's been a very good journey so far. And certainly this is looking quite good this year, with a lot of potential here with you guys reporting over the next few months on this program, which should unlock some very interesting finds here. So good information there, Jason. Just moving over to administrative side for a moment and the capital structure. Let us know where you would expect to stand on cash post the current planned drill program. Of course, not expanding that, which could happen, but just where you guys expect to be on budget post program. And then, just thinking on how you might look to finance into 2027. And then with that, remind the audience on current shares outstanding and, of course, the key shareholders.
Yes. Okay. So we currently have just over 100. I think fully diluted, we are at 120 million shares. So market cap at $1.25 is in that sort of 130, 140 range. Cash is sitting at 20 million. The initial first 3 months, I keep referring to it being potentially transformational. I think the draw on our treasury would be in the vicinity of around $5 million for those first 3 months. So your listeners, if they're owning shares now, they're getting a lot of bang for buck based on where we're at treasury-wise. For the next $5 million spend out of 20, we're going to learn a significant amount about how good this project can be. And I think that they've got some what I would call protection on the downside to a certain extent, because we know that Cowley is going to stack up. We have a high confidence it'll stack up as an economic resource, subject to some final delineation drilling that we'll do. And then in terms of our shareholders, we would have 5 institutions, highly recognized resource specific or sophisticated resource investors that would account for about 25% of our register. We then have a group of high net worth sophisticated mining investors out of Vancouver. There's 5 of them. Again, together they would be about 25%. So half the register would be held with 5 sophisticated resource institutions, 5 sophisticated high net worth mining investors. Directors, insiders, management would account for another almost 20% of the company. You then have our Howard Coyne and Son, our partners, located in Whitehorse. They were the original vendors of the project. They'd be around about 15%. So the company is quite tightly held, but with enough free float for buying interest. And then I think the way I would look at it in terms of valuation, when we look at Foran Mining was recently taken over by Eldorado Gold for 3.8 billion Canadian. That was off the back of 40 million tons at 2% equivalent on an underground resource. I believe that actual resource would have been probably a lot higher. I think it would be maybe closer to 80 million tons in and around that grade, but it is an underground mine and it's a lot more advanced. It's in construction. But that gives you a feel for when we grow up, where we're headed with potential valuation, when I'm referring to 100 million tons potential in one small area at 1 to 1.5% equivalent at surface, not at underground. Then you have Arizona Sonoran was recently taken over as well by Hud Bay. I think the valuation there came in at 1.8 billion on a different style of project, but again, at a resource level that you could argue is where we're headed as well. And that is not in construction. That was at feasibility stage, so a lot earlier than Foran. And then you can look at other companies like Maramaka. You can look at Meridian Mining. There's Faraday Copper. And I think your listeners can only do their research and they can see these companies are post-resource, into pre-feasibility, and their market caps are ranging from 800 million to 1.5 billion and higher. So we are pre-resource. We are looking at getting to the point where we're going to be reporting resources in and around those examples that I've given. And so that's where I think it's a function of how good can Gladiator be, and not necessarily, is it a binary? We certainly don't believe it's a binary. We think that what we've revealed at this project so far will underpin a valuation for it at and around these levels, if you're a big believer in the copper price. And so really it's a function of where can we take it. And, 5 times your money for, based on us achieving what we want to see in the next 2 or 3 months, it's achievable, Andrew. I'm not promoting. I'm a large shareholder myself. That's what I believe, for my own investment. So, and then beyond that, it can be even obviously a lot more because of the potential of the whole belt of what we're uncovering.
Yeah, agreed with that. I think right now the opportunity for folks is to look at this, do some evaluation. You've mentioned lots of peers, some of the transactions, some of the folks working directly in Yukon, and that province in Canada is definitely heating up. There's some big players that are coming in there as well, and some good successes. And I think here, this points to an opportunity, although you and I could probably have an argument about this, but although there is some more risk here, there is a lot of potential. And I think you guys have started to uncover that already with some of the work that's been done, aside from some of the history on the project. So very good information there, Jason. And of course, having skin in the game like you guys do here on capital structure, always an important feature as well. among some of the other shareholders there. Well, look, I really appreciate the time for the update today. And short of any other comments you want to add, we'll do that now. And I'll leave you with this question for potential investors who are listening in. Gladiator Metals has a market capitalization of about 140 million Canadian dollars. Why should the company be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
We are in pre-resource, we're targeting post-resource, and it's really how big will that resource be. So it's an excellent opportunity to enter now at a market valuation that you can see from the examples that I've given from recent takeover transactions and just current market valuations, that there is the opportunity to 5 or 10 times your money over the course of as we drill, and we're fully funded to do that, and you'll be getting results fairly quickly as well, all at the same time where I think we can manage the downside because we have a high degree of confidence in a cornerstone, what we believe will be delivering as a cornerstone resource at Cowley. So I believe that your upside is unlimited, and I would say that, but I also believe that your downside is managed and limited.
How can folks get in touch with questions?
Well, they can, everything comes through to me on the info@gladiatormetals.com.
Jason, well, look, thank you for the update on Gladiator. Looks like it's going to be a busy, eventful couple months ahead here for this season and that drill campaign. And we're looking forward to having you back in the coming months to update.
Thank you, Andrew. It was good to be back.